Okay, good evening everybody. We are continuing with Mesilat Yesharim, Finding Your Path. Tonight I want to talk about comedy. Comedy is an interesting thing, comedy. There's a story they tell about the last of the great actor-managers in England, Donald Woolfit, Sir Donald Woolfit. And Sir Donald Woolfit was lying on his deathbed, and he was gathered all his young actors who were in his company, this touring company they had. In those days, the leading actor would also be the manager, take all the leading parts, and he was dying. So one of his young actors said, "Sir Donald, after a life so filled with success, dying must be hard. Dying must be hard." He said, "Dying is easy. Comedy is hard." Comedy is hard. Comedy is a mysterious thing. Some things are funny, things are not funny. Why some things are funny, difficult to analyze. And comedy really has two sides to it, and that's what I want to speak about tonight, because on the one hand we see that comedy, we say in Shir HaMalos, before a festive meal, after a festive meal, Oz Yemolei Schok Pinu, then our mouths will be filled with laughter. Oz Yemolei Schok Pinu. And yet we're going to see Mesilat Yesharim has a very negative view of laughter. That's what we're going to talk about tonight, the idea of comedy, try to analyze maybe a little bit what comedy is, why comedy is positive, why comedy can be negative, and really how this fits into chapter 5 of Mesilat Yesharim, which, if you remember, I think we briefly touched on it last week, and I'll do a very brief resume. We are holding in a section of Mesilat Yesharim where he's already been speaking about the quality of zehirus. Zehirus means watchfulness, being careful, thinking about your life, analyzing your actions to make sure they fit within what the Torah wants from us. And now he's reached the point where we're talking about those things which detract, which take a person away from this vigilance. It's probably a good translation of zehirus. From this vigilance which is essential for a person if he wants to serve Hashem. Of course, the whole presupposition of the book is that a person wants to serve Hashem, as he says at the beginning. The Mesilat Yesharim is not aimed, is not directed at trying to convince people that the Torah is true. The Mesilat Yesharim is talking to a frum crowd. It's talking to people who believe in Hashem, who believe that the Torah is true, who believe in all the mitzvahs. But nevertheless, as he says in the beginning, to the extent that these truths are self-evident, if one could paraphrase the American Declaration of Independence, to the extent that these truths are self-evident, so is forgetfulness in their regard extremely prevalent. Meaning, the more you know something, the easier it is to forget it. Meaning that the more well-known and the more axiomatic something is, the more difficult it is to make it a part of one's emotional reality. The things that we know intuitively often are things that we don't act on. They get ignored, they get brushed aside. Oh yeah, I know that, I know, of course. So Mesilat Yesharim, the whole of Mesilat Yesharim really basically, as he says at the beginning, is like a tool, is a weapon that seeks to attack this complacency, inherent complacency that a person has by virtue of the fact that these innate, inherent truths are there and they sit ignored in our lives very often. And Mesilat Yesharim empowers. For a person who learns the book correctly and puts its messages and its lessons into practice, he will find that this revitalizes his avodas Hashem and will bring him, that's the whole purpose of the book, and will bring him very close to Hashem. And all the steps that are necessary in order to ascend this ladder, to follow the path of the just, which is a path, and you can't jump. All spirituality has to be incremental. One of the biggest dangers of a person is to think that he can jump to the shamayim. A person who jumps too high will find himself sitting very painfully back down on earth. The only way that a person can grow is to take each step, secure each step, and climb up rung by rung this ladder, which is precarious because there are many things which will try and knock a person down. And this is on this level, this first level, if you like, the level after Torah. The first level on the ladder is this idea of zehirus, of vigilance, of watchfulness. So he says there are three things, three detractors, three things that take a person away from being able to be vigilant in his observance, his care in protecting his relationship with Hashem, by not transgressing the negative mitzvahs, the mitzvahs lo sa'aseh. And those three things are, we started last week, we'll just mention them again. Number one is tirus olam hazeh, over-involvement in this world. The second one is schok v'lotzon. Schok means laughter. Lotzon means ridicule, scoffing at things. And they're different, will come, even though they're allied, laughter and ridicule. Very often go together, but they are somewhat different. And we'll discuss that. And the last one is bad company. These are the three things that remove a person from the midah of zehirus, watchfulness, vigilance. We spoke about last week how over-involvement in this world takes a person away from being vigilant. And the reason is that to the extent a person is involved with olam hazeh, with this world, he cannot be involved with olam haba. There's, as they say in Yiddish, mechanisch tanzen auf zwei chasnas. You can't dance at two weddings at the same time. Now, of course, everybody to a certain extent has to be involved in this world because we're in a physical world, we have physical bodies. The body has needs, we need sleep, we need food, we need a certain amount of recreation, a certain amount of, I guess they call it nowadays, chilling. That's the necessity. But one has to be aware that all of these things, their nature is to lead a person away from spirituality, necessary as they are, but they have to be done within the ways that the Torah prescribes for us. I think we mentioned last week, Judaism is not a monastic religion. It frowns on monasticism except in very rare cases. Judaism is the way that a person can harness the physicality of this world. There's nothing more physical than Shabbos. And yet Shabbos is the holiest day of the week. Shabbos is all about pleasure. Shabbos is about eating. Shabbos is about sleeping. Shabbos is about the ta'anug, the pleasure of learning Torah, the pleasure of family life. Shabbos is all about olam hazeh in a sense on the outside, but it's really me'el olam haba. It's the closest whisper, the most distant whisper that we can experience in this world of the world to come. And that's because the Torah is a machine which turns physicality into spirituality. But physicality in its nature tends to take a person away from spirituality. Unless that physical, the word in Hebrew for physicality is chumrius. It's connected to the word chamor, which is like a donkey. So a donkey is a multi-purpose animal. The physical world can be used in order to serve the spiritual. As we mentioned last week, that the body is a necessary partner with the soul, and the Ramchal learns that that's why there has to be the Tchiyas HaMesim, why the body will be resurrected at the correct time, in order that it too should enjoy its reward for being a partner with the neshama in the neshama's elevation. We spoke about this right at the beginning. The neshama reaches much, much higher by virtue of the fact that it enters this world, meets the challenges of this world, and hopefully manages to succeed, elevate itself and elevate the body along with it. This is a basic principle we saw right at the beginning. But the nature of Olam Hazeh, the Tirdas Olam Hazeh, the bothers of this world, everybody knows that that tends to take a person away from his thoughts of Avodas Hashem. And the way that a person is able to combat that, he says, is through learning Torah, which is why it's essential that a person has to fix times for Torah. However much or however little. Ben Hazmanim's coming up soon. And, Ben Hazmanim is a time where it's very difficult to hang on to the spirituality that hopefully one garnered during the time in the yeshiva. After Tisha B'Av, the yeshiva's let out for 3 weeks. It's a time of sakana, a time of danger, spiritual danger and physical danger as well. Unfortunately, very often, things happen in those 3 weeks, after those 3 weeks. In the time in Ben Hazmanim, because the people are not learning to the same degree, the same intensity. I've often thought that really the time after Tisha B'Av for Elul is probably the worst time in the year for there to be Ben Hazmanim, but that's the way it is because, Elul is so short. You have a month as soon as you get back to yeshiva to face Rosh Hashanah and the Day of Judgment. And you really have to, as they say, hit the tarmac running and on Rosh Chodesh Elul, otherwise, a person, if he drifts away during the Ben Hazmanim, those 3 weeks after Tisha B'Av, before Rosh Chodesh Elul, if he doesn't hold on to his level of ruchnius, he can spend the whole of Elul just getting himself to the place where he was, hopefully, back to where he started, which of course is not the idea. Elul is a time of closeness to Hashem, and so it's very important to learn to keep anchored with Torah even in Ben Hazmanim. How much Torah? So I once heard, I don't know if it's true, but somebody once said there's a machlokus between the Gedolim, whether it was 6 minutes or 5 minutes. There's an enormous difference when a person opens up a Gemara, even if he sits down and learns just a few minutes, he's now in contact with Hashem. Of course, I'm not saying that's the ideal, but the minimum is that a person has to open his Gemara every day. He has to open up a Chumash every day. He has to get past the lions, as we used to say. I don't know if you remember, the Gemaras used to have these lions in the beginning. So the joke was, did you manage to get past the lions? Did you open up a Sefer? Did you open up the Gemara? Did you learn? Did you connect? So the way that a person is able to deal with Olam Hazeh, and of course, as I'm saying, the Ben Hazmanim is a time of Olam Hazeh. That's a time where we chill, we relax, we go on a holiday, we spend time with our families. So that can be fraught with problems. And it's essential that a person is connected to Torah. Somebody who's in business, it's essential for him to connect to have Torah there, because Torah midei Mevili days Zihirus. Torah is the things that brings a person to Zihirus. Without a person concentrating, focusing on having a connection with Torah, then he will not be able to escape the tremendous pull of physicality. As we quoted the Gemara in Kedushin, Daf Lamed on Bebeis, Borosi Yetzahara, Bosi Torah Tavlin. So Hashem says, I created the Yetzahara, and I created the Torah, which is the Tavlin. Tavlin has two meanings in Hebrew. One is antidote and the other is spice. The Torah is the antidote to physicality, but it's also the spice of life. I think we mentioned last week that when a person finds little pleasure in the taste of his food, what does he do? He eats more and more and more, because he's trying to substitute quantity for quality. If the quality isn't there, then I'll take the quantity. Of course, he never achieves that, and that's why we see in the secular world where so much of life has been denatured, the taste has been taken out of it. Because everything is in front of your eyes the whole time, that people have become desensitized to even the physical things in life. So what they do, there's this overconsumption, there's this trying to squeeze out of the physical world to the nth degree, to ridiculous, obscene lengths to try and get a bit of taste out of this world. Baruch Hashem, the Torah gives us taste. It puts the taste into the physical. I'm not going to go into too many details. A Jewish life a happily married life has tam, has taste. And when a person becomes distracted by the numerous visual distractions which hijack a person's eyes and mind, when a person's hooked into what I call the weapons of mass distraction, where, God forbid, he can be anywhere in 2 seconds, this desensitizes him. The Torah puts the taste back into life. Torah Tavlin. But the Mesilat Yesharim says that the Torah is a precise formula. Hashem, nobody knows better the cure, the antidote to a problem, to a disease, than the person who created that disease, so to speak. Hashem created the Yetzer Hara. He created the problem, quote unquote. And of course, therefore, only Hashem knows the correct way that a person can overcome his Yetzer Hara, his negative drive, his desire, his physicality, his desire to be cut off, to just enjoy himself, go for it, live for today, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. The philosophy of the Epicurean world that we live in. He who dies with the most prizes wins. So all of these ideas draw a person away, and the only way, and this is what he stresses, that a person can combat that, is through Torah. He gives a mashal, he gives a parable of somebody who would goes to the doctor says, prescribes him a prescription, and back in the days they used to actually write out prescriptions, which of course were all illegible. For some reason or other, doctors always have terrible writing. But apparently there was some secret code between the pharmacist and the doctor whereby the pharmacist understood what was necessary, would give you the pills. It was like you took your pills, you took them home, you stuck them in the medicine cabinet, and you pulled out something else going, yeah, I think I'll have that. I mean, Meshuggah, who would do such a thing? And yeah, that's exactly the mashal that the Mesilat Yesharim gives. What kind of crazy person goes to a doctor and then decides that he's going to take some other pill? My father, Shalom, used to say it's a similar idea. I'm sure it's a Yiddish expression, but I only heard him say it in English. A person doesn't buy a dog and bark himself. If you're going to go to a doctor, if you're going to go to the expert, then follow the expert's advice. Hashem created the Yetzer Hara, Barasi Yetzer Hara, Barasi Torah, which is the Tavlin. Only the Torah can combat the Yetzer Hara, nothing else. Anything else that anybody would come up with their own patent remedies, they are absolutely useless. They may be very high sounding. They may, have tremendous words of approval from all kinds of people with august titles, but they will not help a person to become spiritual, to become close to Hashem. They are fake. They may feel good, they may sound good, but only the Torah, only the designer's antidote can hit the mark, can hit the spot. So that's the first thing that he spoke about, how this world takes a person away from vigilance in his performance of the Torah, and the way that he can protect himself from this is by learning Torah, being connected to Torah, and even in a minimal way, because it's like you're plugging in. Okay, you only pick up a couple of amps of electrical, spiritual energy, but it keeps you going. You're plugged in, you're attached. Even a minimal amount of Torah. Now, of course, I'm not saying minimal is ideal, but one should never disparage anything which is an advance in spirituality. My Rebbe always says, in spirituality, there's no such thing as a small. Nothing is small in spirituality. However small the step is, it's a giant leap. It makes a person a different person. Okay, so that's what we discussed last week. And he also adds that in addition to learning Torah, we spoke about this before, a person should set aside time to analyze his actions. It's called Cheshbon HaNefesh. And analyze, I'm not going to go back over this, as we said this in previous Yesharim, to analyze, to think about his life, to look at it through a magnifying glass, to take time out and introspect. whether he wants to do this by going out and sitting in the country somewhere, which is a place where he can reflect. Reflection is very, very important. Because one of the things that this world does, as we saw in the first chapter, is the person tends to rush forward like the charging horses in a battle without really thinking where he's going. Time out gives a person a chance to think, oh, just 1 second, where exactly am I going? So this is an essential thing in order for a person to protect himself, to protect his vigilance, to protect his hearers, learning Torah and taking time out to analyze his life in the ways that the Mesilat Yesharim describes at the beginning of the book. I'm not going to do that again. Now, the second thing, which is what we started off tonight, Achasheni Hine, and we're going to start there if you want to follow along. Achasheni, you have it? Yep. Follow along in the English if you like. So, Achasheni hi hinehu kosher ma'od. He says actually that this first step, this first protection against losing one's vigilance is relatively simple. It's the easiest of these three things to protect against. I'm not going to say that it's easy, but it's doable. The second thing is much more difficult. Achasheni hinehu kosher ma'od. The second is very difficult. V'hu haschok v'halotzoin. And that is laughter and mockery, ridicule. Let's first of all analyze the difference between the two. Schok is what we call lightheadedness. Schok is where everything is frivolity, not taking things too seriously. Laughter. It's always interesting to me that, where do comedians stand up and do their gigs? In bars. We're going to see the two things really connected. There's a certain kind of disconnection with reality that comes through alcohol, and a disconnection with reality that comes through comedy. To make everything light, everything is not significant. Frivolity. And the second part of this is a specific kind of comedy, which is lotzon, which is ridicule, making things unimportant. It's not important. Lotzon, scoffing at things, taking serious things and making light of them. These two things, if a person gets involved in this, will bring him into big trouble. We'll see. Kimi tovea bom, somebody who's wallowing, who's drowning in schok, frivolity, velotzon, and scoffing, ridicule. Hu kami tovea biyam hagodol. He's like he's drowning in the big sea. Shekosha ma'od lihimoleit mimenu. It's very difficult to rescue himself from this. Ki hinei haschok hu ma'abed es leiv ha'odam. Very strong words. The laughter makes a person, so to speak, lose his heart. He loses his sympathy, loses his sensitivity, Ad shekava ein hatam v'hadeya mosheles boy. It gets to the point when a person becomes suffused with lightheadedness, with schok, with frivolity. He loses reason and his sensitivity and his sense. V'harehu kashiko o shota. He becomes like somebody who's drunk or a fool, an imbecile. And I don't think it's unconnected that you find bars are the place that comedians usually stand up and do their routines. It's impossible to reason or to direct somebody if he is drunk or if he's wallowing in ridicule, in frivolity. Because everything is a joke, it's all funny. Because both of these categories of people will not accept direction. That's what Shlomo HaMelech says in Koheles. Lischok amarti moholol. As far as chok, frivolity, I said, it's worthless. Ulesimcha ma so. And simcha, what good is it? The Chachamim Zichron Levracha Omru, schok v'kalus rosh, margilim es ha'odam le'erva. Schok, frivolity v'kalus rosh, or laughter, and kalus rosh means frivolity also, lightheadedness. Margilim es ha'odam le'erva. When a person gets involved with these things, it's much more easy for him to lose his moral compass. Ki af al pi shechamura hi ha'erva etzel kol ben das. Because even though immorality, promiscuity, is considered to be a serious thing, it's a serious trap for anybody, for a person who is intelligent, who has a brain in his head. V'libi yorei mikrov aleo, and he naturally, his heart fears to come close to breaking those boundaries. Mikoach hatzio shekava nitztaya besichlo me'amitas godel pish'o v'rav onsha, because he already has impressed into his mind. I mean, we're talking about a different generation now, but it's already impressed in his mind, and Baruch Hashem, even to this day, amongst our community, there is this still, and we're not talking about the common world, but people still are, it's been impressed into them. They have an idea in their mind how the truth of the seriousness of the sin and the great punishment that there is for a person who, God forbid, gets involved in promiscuity, immorality. Hine aschok v'hakalos rosh mamshichin oisay ma'at. Frivolity, lightheadedness, comedy brings a person bit by bit to loosen up, just like alcohol. When you say, why don't you loosen up? Loosen up, man, you're so uptight. It loosens a person's sense of values. It distracts them. It makes it much more easy. Bit by bit. Umakarvim oisoi, it draws him closer. Holoich v'korev, more and more he approaches tier, hayira sora me'olov, that he loses this natural ingrained fear. Ma'at, little by little. Madrega acha madrega, he goes down step by step. Things that he wouldn't have done yesterday, he'll do today. And the things that he'll do tomorrow, he wouldn't do today. Ad shiagia el ha'ovan atzmo v'yaseu, until he'll get to the point where he's faced by the possibility of doing this aveira, and he'll do it. Not immediately, but bit by bit, because schok, the kalas rosh, make everything, it's not so bad. Why are you being so frum? This is not so bad. That's not so bad. This is not bad. But eventually, if a person isn't careful, if he doesn't guard, as he's saying, this is one of the things that takes a person away from his vigilance, is this light-hearted. Light-hearted can be positive. I'm using it in the sense of being light-headed. Light-headed approach to life, a lacking of seriousness, frivolous. For kol kach lama, why? How is it that he managed to get so far down? Lefi shekochosh seichel mitzius. Shekol mitzius hazihirus toli besimas leiv ala devarim. This is the fundamental point. What is we've been saying to now all the way we've been learning these chapters? What is our watchword, which is our code word for all this idea of zihirus? Is what? Think. Focus. Just as the whole idea, the whole essence of zihirus, of vigilance, depends on focus, paying attention, keeping your eye on the ball, thinking about things. Kein kol atzmos shel schok, the whole idea of laughter, eina ela meisir halev mina machshavos hayeshoros vanyonos. v'ha'inyonios. The whole idea, the whole mahus, the whole essence of frivolity, of laughter, is none other than to remove a person's focus and his attention, to stop him thinking thoughts which are straight and significant and essential. V'nimsa shelo yavo hahiru ha'yira beliba klal. And what happens is that gradually has been describing thoughts of yira, of fear of Hashem, of being worried, of being concerned, not to commit aveiros, vanish from his heart. V'tireh, next paragraph. V'tireh kshi halotzoim v'ha hashchosoi. Haraba ki kamoya mogen. Let's see, he has another idea now. We spoke about comedy, and I mentioned at the beginning of this year that we say in Shir Amalos, Ozim oles chok pinu. Then our mouths will be full of laughter. Now everything we've said up till now seems to be the laughter is not a very good thing. Maybe the idea is as follows. The Zohar says that the 12 months correspond to the 12 tribes, to the 12 months of the year, the 12 zodiac signs. They also correspond to certain senses of the human body. The month we're in now, Tammuz, is connected with Riyah. It's the time when the spies were spying out the land. Av is Shmiya, is hearing. And the month of Adar is connected to the human characteristic of laughter. And the festival of Purim is connected to laughter. It's a time where we scoff at Haman. The quality of laughter, as we said before, is that, let me give you an example. When a clown falls on his face, it's somewhat funny. When a politician falls on his face, it's much more funny. Incongruity is one of the essence of comedy. When things get turned upside down, the reaction of a person is to laugh. The hippuch, the sudden overturning of Haman, where the whole of the Purim story seems to be like a classic tragedy. Things are getting worse and worse. The letters are sent out to destroy the entire Jewish people. And then suddenly, in a flash, in a complete overturn, everything turns on its head. From Avel, the Simcha, from great tragedy to comedy. In fact, in point of fact, the classic structure of any comedy is that everything is going gradually or suddenly, even worse and worse and worse, and then suddenly everything flips. Hippuch, it's called in Hebrew. The sudden overturn. That quality, of comedy, finds its correct place in the Geula. When Hashem finally, should be soon, brings the Geula to the Jewish people. Suddenly, in a flash, everything will turn over. Everything that we thought was valuable, everything that people held so dear will be shown to be worthless. All of a sudden, all of the troubles, all of the problems, all of the death, the massacres, all of the hostages, everything which has been so tragic, in a split second will be turned over. The reaction to that sudden reversal is schok. Oz yamale schok pinu. But until that moment, until we reach that moment, until the Oz comes, then laughter is disconnected from reality. Laughter can only be something which will take a person away from his true focus. Now he goes on, and maybe we'll finish with this today. V'tireh koshi halotzon v'hashchoso haraba. And you'll see the problem, the difficulty of scoffing and its destruction, its great destruction. Ki kamo hamogen hamashuach b'shemen asher yashmit v'yapil me'olov hachitzim u'mashlichom lo'oretz v'lo yaniach osom sheyagiu el guf ha'odom ken alotzon b'fnei hatochecha v'hamardus. Ki b'leitzonas echad v'schog kotten yapil ha'odom me'olav ribui godel min ha'sorus v'haspalus. And you can see, he gives a very interesting mashal here, how problematic scoffing, how destructive it is. He gives a mashal, he gives a parable here to the idea of a shield which is smeared with oil or grease. A shield which is smeared with oil or grease, and the oil or grease here, as we're talking about, that's the parable, that's the mashal of schok, laughter, frivolity, ridicule. When a person tries to give tochacha, when he tries to aim the arrow of reproof, when a person tries to give you direction, and when he tries to tell you you're doing the wrong thing. So laughter manages to deflect all of these good ideas, and they fall to the ground and they're absolutely worthless. This is why frivolity is so dangerous, because it doesn't allow the words of reproof, of correction, of help to penetrate into the heart of the person who's wallowing in frivolity. Just like the arrows are deflected and fall to the ground, useless. Because he says, with one small jibe, one small jest, one small joke, a person can destroy a whole edifice of ethical improvement. How often a person goes and he hears a shir, a shmooze, and he's inspired by it. And he comes away from the shmooze inspired with a determination to improve himself, whether it's to improve himself in keeping his eyes where away from where they shouldn't go, or in ben odom lechavero, treating his friends, his family better, his roommate better, or he wants to improve his davening, wants to turn up on time, doesn't want to skip anymore, wants to stand still when he's saying brachas, wants to be mechaben, he wants to have in mind Yud Kei Vav Kei when he says brachas. All the many ideas which can inspire us, and we are capable of being inspired. One of the wonderful things about a human being is that he can be inspired to do things which are way beyond what he thought he could do. All it needs is one person to come along and make a little joke, a little shtech, you say in English, a little pinprick. Pull out a little thing at the bottom, and the whole edifice of this inspiration collapses. Inspiration is very fragile. In fact, the Bali Musa say one of the most important things about inspiration is that it has to be concretized. Whenever you hear something that inspires you, you should find something small that you can put your inspiration into this box and lock it up and protect it. This is a slightly different idea. Inspiration by itself evaporates like steam. Inspiration has to be concretized. It has to be made into something. And again, it's much better to do something small, because big things usually are difficult to keep up with. Person chaps his pilus, let's say, about the idea of saying brachas with more kavanah, saying blessings with more intention, more focus on Hashem's name, on the fact that I'm receiving this tremendous good from Hashem, and I have to say thank you for it. So he decides that once a week, he's going to bench with a siddur, let's say, from the text. So that will protect that inspiration, because it becomes from something abstract to something physical and practical. What I'm saying here, what he's saying here is something a little bit different, but it's the same idea that if that inspiration is, the inspiration will never penetrate, because there'll be somebody or something, or if a person is lost in this idea of frivolity, the idea, the seriousness of the idea will never be able to penetrate to his heart. And he'll never be able to do tshuva for that. And that is why this second thing, as he mentioned here, of frivolity is much more difficult than just being the first problem of being over-involved in olam hazeh of this world. Okay, I mean, we haven't got to the end of this, but I think what I'd like to do is just to read this through and draw out any small points, and then next week to go on to the third section here. Okay, so it says, V'lo mipnei, okay, this is actually an important point, I forgot, sorry. V'lo mipnei chulshas ha'inyonim. It's not that a person will fail to receive this spiritual encouragement and reproof because of the weakness of the ideas themselves. V'lo mipnei chisron havonas halev, and not because of the lack of the understanding of the heart. Ela b'nei koach halotzen, rather because of the power of frivolity, of scoffing, of ridicule, hahores kol inyonei hamusa, which destroys all the ideas of spiritual reproof and improvement, the yira and Yerushalayim, the fear of heaven. V'nei hanavi Yeshaya haya tzovech. Yeshaya, Isaiah, screamed out like a cockerel, it says here. Ki haroeh shezeh haya ma shelo haya maniach mokom letoch hachois. The prophet Yeshaya warned the Jewish people, and he saw that what prevented them from accepting his rebukes was not because of the lack of strength of his criticism, but because they were involved, their minds were involved in frivolity. Shiasu roshem v'haya ma'abed tikvasam el hachotim. That they were lost. It left, this lightheadedness left no room for his barbs and his criticisms to penetrate to their hearts. V'hu ma she'omar v'ata al tislotzasu pen yechazu mosreichem. He said, do not scoff, because maybe you'll find out that you'll be caught up in the punishment afterwards. Ukavar gozro omra chachamim zichron levracha. And it says, we already know, the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, Shahaleit Mevi Hayisurin Olov. The late, a scoffer, brings punishment upon himself. Kizehu Dava Shahadin Nosei Nosoi. This is something which is by right, by perforce, literally. Because if he's not going to be able to, brought to his senses, so to speak, by tochocha, by musa, by rebuke, and by encouragement to change his ways. Kimisha mispael min ha-hisponenus umin ha-limudim. A person who's inspired and improves himself through introspection and through learning Torah. Einot tzorich sheyaseh begufo. He doesn't require physical punishment, because the two things really are taking you to the same place. The whole idea of punishment is never vindictive in Judaism. It's it's a correction, or it's a kapara, an atonement. But a person who already manages to fix himself up will not need physical chastisement. But if he fails to do that, then memela, necessarily, he's going to have to go through the process of physical punishment. Ki kavar yoshuv mechatosov b'li zeh. He's already, a person who's improved himself doesn't need that. Mekoach ahir huei tshuva, because he already had thoughts of tshuva, she'avoled belibo, which had been born in his heart al yedei ma she'yikra, through what he's read, O sheyishma min hamusurim v'hatochachos, by attending shirim, by learning sfarim, ach haletzonim, scoffers, she'einam mispalim min hatochachos, who do not manage to become inspired to do tshuva and carry on because they're wallowing, they're in this frivolity and jest and ridicule. Ein lehem tikun ela hashvatim. There is no other way for them to be fixed except through punishment. She'ela lo yiyeh lehem koach leitzanusam lo d'chosam me'olehem ka'asher yidchu hamusorim. It's something of a joke here, he's saying, because scoffing and lightheadedness is not going to save them when they get physical punishment. That's not going to help them at all. It may ward off spiritual, ethical improvement talks and sforim, but when a person's, God forbid, hurting, making a joke of it is not going to help him. According to the seriousness of the fate of the chet, of the sin and its ramifications, correspondingly, so will the true judge make more severe the punishment. That's what Chazal taught us in Avodah Zarah, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis again. Kosha leitzonos. Leitzonos, scoffing, is difficult, it's problematic. Tehilasa Yisurim, because it brings, first of all, problems, Yisurim, afflictions, Vasofa Kloya, and its end is obliteration. Shenei, as it says in Yeshaya, Pen yechasaku mos rechem, ki cholo v'ne'atzu shomati. He brings a posik. So, this is what I wanted to talk about today, was the idea of the second more serious problem, the problem of frivolity, scoffing. And B'ezrat Hashem, next week we will carry on, which is the third, the most problematic of all of those things that stop a person being a zohir, vigilant, is bad company.